Good morning and welcome to the 2017 NACTA Conference in Orlando, Florida, and part of the Athletic Director U Series. My name is Chatlos. I lead the sports practice at Ventura Partners. I'm proud to be here with two of my friends and leaders in the Athletic Director space, Mr. Gene Taylor from Kansas State University and Mr. Ross Bjork from Ole Miss. Morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Absolutely.
We're
Glad to be here.
Yeah, good. We're going to touch on a few topics today. One, and obviously you both have lived it coming up through your path, and now are living it again as athletic directors, is the importance of hiring a number two. I'm seeing it in my space and some of the work that we're doing for athletic directors and helping them identify and recruit a number two. There's different titles these days. It could be COO, could be deputy AD, could be senior associate, executive associate, a million titles out there. But let's drill down to more about the job and not the title. As you all came up through the ranks, and Ross, again, UCLA and then Western Kentucky to Ole Miss, and Gene, you most recently at Iowa as the number two, talk about that role and how what you tried to do for your athletic director in a way of support and running the ship when they would get pulled away. I'll start with you first.
Well, at Iowa, it was a fairly new position. At Iowa, we were going through a transition where a lot of our senior staff were getting ready to retire. And so Gary was looking to create that number two position. He really wanted to be on the internal side of the house, the focus of, and I was a sitting athletic director. He was actually looking for a former athletic director to be able to, handle the issues if he weren't going to be there. So it was a new role. So we kind of evolved over the time that I was there in the 3 years, but really spent a lot of time. I had football operations, basketball operations, facilities management, event management, oversaw those portions of the operation. But he was really looking for somebody with experience that could come in, and if he was gone, he felt comfortable to say, you have the information and the knowledge to be able to make a decision in case of his absence. So it worked out pretty well, and it's evolved over time, and it was a great opportunity for me as well.
Yeah. Now, how hard was that for you to leave a place that you loved at North Dakota State, and you were sitting athletic director for 12, 13 years. Anyone seen the press conference, we know how hard it was for you to leave.
I have to go back to the press conference.
Right.
It was hard. It was hard for a lot of reasons. Obviously, we had a lot of success and be part of something that you build into something like we had at North Dakota State. Obviously, you have the family dynamics. But my goal was always to be a Power 5 athletic director. Even the success we had at North Dakota State, I wasn't getting those interviews. I wasn't getting those opportunities. Gary Bart is a very well-respected athletic director out there, so to be able to work with him, to be able to get the Big Ten experience, the Power 5 experience, it's just different at this level, and it helped me a ton.
Well, how different was it? Did it truly advance your experience to be more ready for this role?
I would say I'm much more ready now at Kansas State by having you're dealing with bigger contracts, coaches that have a more national presence, budgets that are just so much different than what we had at the FCS level.
Okay. Yeah. Ross, talk about you.
I think the role of the number two, and Gene covered a lot of the technical, sort of job description aspects of it, and those things are all important because we do have to manage those type of things. But I think the other key aspect of the number two spot is trust. Can the athletic director trust that person unequivocally to do and execute, the will of the athletic director or the will of the institution, and really think like an athletic director. So that's why Gene was perfect, for Gary at Iowa. And I think, in my role at UCLA or University of Miami prior to that, I didn't have the chair experience, but I was around, big time settings at Missouri, and that's what they wanted. And so I think looking at blind spots as well, ADs can't be everywhere. We have 12 buildings at Ole Miss. We have 260 employees. Man, if I don't have the right people covering those blind spots and making sure that I can trust them to execute, our core values and our vision and our purpose, then really the technical things don't matter. And so that's really important as I was the number two person, and now as I look, to really kind of reorganize my executive team now that we do have an opening. Our deputy spot is opening. Gene will go through a transition now that he's at Kansas State. And so looking for the trust, looking for the technical, looking for, does this person think like an AD? I think those are all characteristics that are important in this spot.
I think the one thing I could add to that is also as a number two, being able to go in and have confidence to tell your boss, hey, look, you need to look at it differently. And that's where the trust factor comes in, because if you don't have that as a number two to be able to come in and say, hey, boss, you got this wrong, That's really big, and that's where the
We
trust
all,
factor
and
comes in.
ADs, we all have weaknesses, right? There's things that I'm not good at, and to have somebody walk in my office and say, hey Ross, you know what, we ought to think about this, or you know what, I noticed this,
Yeah.
you know what, that turned into this, the unintended consequences. And so we have to have people that will tell us no, push back, challenge. I still may overrule them, but at least I have all the information.
Right. Some of the challenges when you sat in that number 2 chair, because as an AD can also, delegate authority and responsibility. You've come up through the ranks and with your peers. How hard is that? The AD's away and an executive decision needs to be made for you to kind of go to your, peers and now say, hey, I'm in charge. This is what we're doing. Do you have any bumps or any stories around that?
When I got to UCLA, I was a young guy. There was a lot of senior level folks that had been at UCLA a long time. Most of them were, West Coast, connected type people, and here I am coming from the Midwest, moving from Miami, Florida. Who is this guy?
Right.
But I think the key is trust. Building that trust, and what, maybe I did have to make a decision, or maybe, Dan asked me to execute something, and I had to go to all those people. But I think the key was early on building trust, building that relationship. Hey, we're all in this together. This is for the betterment of the program. It's not about me. As an individual, it's about the program. I think you have to start there, and then hopefully it works out.
Right. About you coming in, someone who had 13 years in the chair and now being the number 2 at Iowa, did you have to quickly build that rapport so that people trusted you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always still, you're the new guy. I will say that coming in with the experience that I had at North Dakota State and the success, I think people were a little more familiar at Iowa with North Dakota State, so it wasn't quite of a big of a hurdle for me. But you have coaches that have been there a long time. You come in and have to work with a guy like Kirk Ferentz, and you have to build his trust as the football coach. He has that with the AD, obviously, and understand, and like Fran McCaffrey and some of the coaches that have been there for a while. I wouldn't say they have big personalities, but certainly they have high expectations and they have a lot of pressure on them. So that was kind of, you don't just establish that because you walk in the door. You've got to build that over time, and it took probably a year, all honesty, to get comfortable. But after that, it felt pretty good for me.
And they were still welcoming of you, even though they scheduled that North Dakota State football
I was
game
gonna say that.
against Iowa.
The fans weren't too happy about it.
That was the trap game?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's transition then to now as an AD. So now you filled that role as a number 2. You've seen the challenges. You've seen what you've been able to do for your athletic director to protect them, to help them, to advise them, to build that trust. So now as you become an athletic director, how do you think about that as you go about building your team? And as you said, you have an opening right now, and Gene, you're building your staff at Kansas State. How do you assess that when you're thinking about characteristics that you're looking for in a number 2, your network of people that you've come across throughout the years? You know a lot of people. Are you keeping a short list? Are you thinking about that? Are you kind of, as you go through your career, thinking about, hey, when I get this role, I'd love to bring so-and-so as a part of my team? Start with you.
I've gone through it at 2 different stops, at Western Kentucky and at Ole Miss when I first got to Ole Miss, and now I'll go through it a 3rd time. Yep. When I was at Western Kentucky, we don't have much resource, right? So you're working on a budget that you're scraping by. Every penny counts. And so when I got there, I believed that I needed a number 2 person. And it took me about 3 to 6 months to really assess the organization, and we decided to promote within. And bump that person up to a number 2 spot. He's now the athletic director. Right. So that's good succession planning.
Right, there you go.
That we'll talk about.
Yeah, there you go. Nice segue.
And then when I got to Ole Miss, we really needed to be robust on the external side. We had to capitalize on a capital campaign. We had to sell more tickets, more sponsorship. We really had to reorganize the external piece. And so what I was looking for was that type of strength. Who could galvanize on the external side? And now that we have an opening, the needs are perhaps different. Right. And we'll assess, what the right approach is. And so I think each situation is going to be unique in how you go about it. I'm a big believer in that number 2 spot because I think it's important that when the AD is away, okay, who's in charge?
Right.
Well, she's in charge or he's in charge. Some people have number 2s over different areas.
Right.
And that's okay too. And we may go to that at Ole Miss. We're not quite sure yet. But I believe that there has to be a go-to person, and I think that's really important as you, one, as you're coming in as a new AD, but then now that I've been there 5 years now, we sort of have to hit the reset button, what does that look like moving forward? I think all those things are important that you have to take into consideration.
Okay.
Been there 5 years already?
5 years. It goes by fast.
That goes fast.
Blink of an eye.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A similar deal. Obviously, Laird Beach was the deputy and very, very talented individual, so replacing him is never going to be easy. And so that's what I'm doing, assessing as whether it should be an external focus or an internal focus. And I think right now that's what I'm doing. I'm visiting with our staff and just get a sense of what they're looking for. Do they want that go-to person that's always going to be there, and, as opposed to an external focus? So I'm still kind of walking through that, but the good news is I have a great staff in terms of to evaluate that, and I've asked them to just be really open and honest with me about their feelings and what they're looking for. So I'll probably make that decision here, but right now I've been there a month, and it seems like it's gone so quickly that I haven't had a chance to really value that. But I do think the number 2 is important because the staff knows as the AD you're going to be gone a lot, and they want that person to be able to go to with trust. And then it goes back to a lot of things we were talking about. Who can I trust? Somebody internally? Absolutely. We've got some good staff. Are there people on my list externally? Absolutely. I've got a lot of friends that I could trust and bring in, but it's just really going to be best with what our situation is currently.
Yeah, I think you touched on it both. I don't think there's a magic org chart or formula. It definitely depends on the school. I mean, a lot of questions that I get are, what are you seeing in other schools? How are they organized? And a lot of it comes to this number 2 position because, again, I talked about in the beginning, the titles are so different, right, and varied. And I think titles have been inflated to help try to people get maybe bumps, right, a compensation increase, and maybe that's muddied the waters a little bit. But I think what you're both saying, though, is you have to have that clear number 2 from an internal perspective. So when you are away, there is no confusion who's in charge. Decision needs to be made. I mean, there might be 3 or 4 deputies, there might be an internal or an external, but someone's got to be the point person when you're away. So I think that's an interesting point you make, because I think if you look at it, a lot of org charts out there, you might be confused to say, well, who's the number 2, all right? And so, but internally, I'm sure an AD will focus on that, so there's no confusion amongst the team. Talk a little bit about the path to an AD. And you all were just talking about it before we started about where every conference you go, the subject comes up. How do I become an AD? And you probably get hit by thousands here at the conference on advice. So talk a little bit, because again, probably more of a traditional route of coming up through the ranks, and then Group of 5 AD, Power 5 AD, and then your best and most favorite job at the Naval Academy. We know,
absolutely.
right? You need to leave that,
yeah,
right?
There we go.
Right, but
That's your blue and gold tie.
That's right.
That's
Always
good.
represented. But a great job that you could have stayed at forever and built an outstanding program. To then have to step back in that number 2 because you ultimately want to be a Power 5 AD. You probably get asked a lot, as do I. What is the best path to becoming a Power 5 AD?
I don't know if you would take mine.
How much time?
Yeah, I
do
was
we
going
have?
to say, but am I accurate in that? You guys get that a lot.
Yeah, I would say mine was a little more untraditional because I was more on the internal side. I was a ticket guy, business guy. A lot of times they're more externally focused in terms of presidents are looking, can you generate money? Can you create revenue opportunities? And then when I took the job at North Dakota State, they weren't looking for that external person. We were going from Division II to Division I, so they wanted somebody a little bit more internally. How do you build it? How do you design it? And then obviously being at North Dakota State and then taking a step back. And I got that obviously idea from Jack Lingle. He suggested that to Jeff Long when he was at Eastern Kentucky. He said, maybe you should go work for number 2, and he went to Joe Castiglione at Oklahoma. And so that's where it kind of put in my mind that I may have to do that. And so I would say it's a little untraditional. Fortunately for me, it worked out.
Right.
I can't say that it will for everybody, but it did for me, and I'm very, very fortunate because of that.
Being part of the D1A association now called Lead One, Dutch Balkman always did a great job of gathering the data on who are getting the AD jobs. And he kept track of FBS, right? And now we have the Autonomy 5, and so there's 65 of these jobs. So one, they're hard to get.
Yep.
And then you take the FBS piece of it, and there's 128, I think, is what we have now. And he did a study from 1997, really until now. There's only been about 10 to 12 that have gone from FCS, where Gene was at North Dakota State, to FBS. And that number's even smaller to go to the Power 5, if any. There may be just a handful.
Right.
And so I think being the number 2 person at an Autonomy 5, Power 5, is in some ways a lot better. You get more exposure to the high level opportunities. And so what I always tell people is, where do you want to end up? Do you want to work at a Division III school and be the AD there, which is great. Division II, I played Division II football. There's nothing wrong with that level. But if you want to be at an Ole Miss or a Kansas State or an Alabama or Ohio State, it's a risk if you drop down.
Right.
It's a risk. It can happen. It's happened to others, but the numbers are smaller. And so I think that's the starting point is, what's your ultimate goal?
Right.
Where do you want to end up? And then the pathway to get there is, I think you have to be really good at your current job. You have to be well known for something nationally within the industry. And I think you have to build a network of friends and colleagues that respect you, and that when a job does come open, hey, Gene is hiring a number 2 spot. He calls people, hey, I've got 3 people that you should talk to.
Yep.
And you're on that list. You know, how do you get on that list? It's relationships. And so I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but I think you can boil it down into relationships, hard work, producing at your current job, and then understanding, you know, the marketplace and the context of college athletics, and that, you know what, you may not want to dip down because that may be hard to get back up. I think Gene's a great story, and I think you're seeing that more and more, where sitting ADs get the deputy spot, and then they become the AD at Kansas State.
Right.
And so I think that'll be a trend that we all continue to look at.
I've had that question, you know, since I got the job at Kansas State. I probably had half a dozen or so friends say, okay, can I talk to you? So I'm spending a couple of times here at NACTA to have those conversations.
Probably some sitting ADs.
Sitting ADs, yeah, at the FCS level. Is that a good move? How'd it work out? And I would tell, the one thing I would tell every one of them is make sure you go to work for somebody you can trust and you know and you can get along with. I was very, very fortunate to work with a guy like Gary Barta, and that's not always the case, but that would be the first thing. And back to Ross's point, that's what I always tell people that are coming through the business is, where do you want to end up? And if that's your goal, like I said, Division II, Division III, they're all great opportunities, but you kind of need to get in that area, that level, and start there and build your resume at that level.
Well, and the compensation and salaries of the deputy AD have really allowed that to be more prevalent
absolutely.
too, right? I mean, you
Makes it
would have
much
had to take a
easier.
big hit to leave an AD job to do that.
That
Right
makes
now,
it
it's a little bit
much, yeah,
different.
absolutely.
And then you can be selective. When you're in that number 2 spot at a Autonomy 5, you can be way more selective. And you know what, wait on a Kansas State, you know, because there's probably other opportunities. When Gene was at Iowa, you know what, maybe they don't have what I'm looking for, maybe that's not the right locale. Well, Gene's a perfect fit, you know, for Kansas State, and so it worked out.
He looks good in purple.
He does.
Yeah, I got plenty
Got
of
some ties from John Curry. I
absolutely.
think John Curry gave you some ties, right?
Curry,
Thanks, John.
As he walked out the door.
We don't have a lot of time, but let's jump to another subject real quick, succession planning. How important is it to you as an AD when you make a hire, whether it be for your staff or in the coaching ranks? Are you thinking about succession? Are you working with your coaches to groom coaches, assistant coaches who could be head coaches? Are you grooming associates to be seniors and deputies? And is that something you have an eye on? Or is it just sometimes, hey, I need best athlete for this role? I mean, you talked about with the number 2 position of, hey, I need someone to galvanize external at the time. So how much does succession planning come into when you make a hire?
You know, I would say, honestly, we don't do enough of that.
Yep.
I think in our business, I mean, we want, you know, now, we want instant, right? The pressure to win now, if you will, and that could be winning games or winning in academics or winning in facilities. And so I don't think our profession has done a great job with that. Listening to Patrick Weitzel from WME IMG, he said that he's only thinking 2 or 3 years ahead. And he's a 30,000 or 50,000 foot, you know, CEO. And so to hear him say that makes you think that are we on the right track from that perspective? You know, coaches in waiting, I'm not a big believer in that aspect of it because I've seen other examples where that may not have worked out.
Right.
The person either left for another opportunity or the thing just kind of fell apart. It's hard. So I don't think we do enough of that, Chad, to be honest with you. I challenge our staff. I did ask a question. We had a staff retreat. What would our successor think of our decisions? So I think we have to think long term, and we have to think about, hey, who comes after us? But specific roles, I don't think we do a good job in our industry of doing that because it's instantaneous. So I think it's something that I need to focus on, that we need to focus on. Hey, I want to be at Ole Miss for as long as they want me, you know? And so you've got to be thinking like that, and sometimes I think we miss the boat there.
I think from a coaching perspective, when you're hiring a coach, that doesn't enter in your mind because you want to hire the person that's going to be there forever and be successful. Yet, as the person's been there for a while, and they maybe feel like I'll go to Craig Bull's situation when he started having success. In my mind, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to replace this guy at some point, and who is that person? So I don't know that I had a succession plan, but I started looking at people, started looking at watching coordinators, watching head coaches, and seeing their success. And so in the back of my mind, everybody said, "Do you have that list?" Well, I never had a list in my drawer necessarily. I had it in my head. And for us, the guy was internal. It was, Chris Kleiman. It was the best decision that we could have made at the time, but that wasn't a plan. I mean, Craig brought him in because he needed a good defensive coordinator.
Right.
But as I watched Craig get ready to go, I was like, okay, this guy's pretty good. And the offensive coordinator was the other option. So I don't know that you have a plan necessarily, but we have a situation in Kansas State right now. Coach Snyder, I hope he's going to be there for a long time, but he's getting older. He's going to retire someday. What's our plan? I must have been asked that question a million times already in my first month,
Right.
and I don't know that I have one right now. Yeah. And so that's something that'll be, and they don't have that situation. There's some conversation about what that plan's going to be. But I think when you hire somebody initially, it's like you want to hire them for the long haul. You want them to be successful, but as they're there, then you start probably thinking about it a little bit more.
Well, we could talk about the subject a lot longer, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chad.
It was
Yeah,
really
yeah.
good time.
Thanks, Chad.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah.